Continuing from our previous discussion on the deepening of sensation and perception, let's now turn our attention to a more fundamental aspect: what truly constitutes the core of our conscious experience. We begin with a poignant, almost heartbreaking, clinical observation. Imagine a patient staring at a photograph of himself, taken years ago during a happy time. But there's no recognition, no flicker of connection. The unfolding of the photo, once perhaps a desperate anchor to reality, has become a mindless, automatic ritual. This stark scene immediately highlights something profound. There's a crucial distinction between simply being awake or paying attention and having genuine core consciousness, that is, the ability to recognize oneself, to feel, to know. The latter can be lost while the former persists. So, what does this clinical picture tell us? It screams decoupling. Neurological diseases, unfortunately, act like a scalpel, cutting through the tangled web of mental functions to reveal distinct layers. Think about it. Wakefulness and basic attention can often survive quite a bit of damage to the core systems of consciousness. You can be awake, blinking, maybe even making simple movements, yet lack any real sense of self, any emotional resonance, any true knowing. It's like having the engine running but no driver, no awareness of where you are or why you're going. And notice the pattern. When that core sense of knowing and self is damaged, higher order functions like planning, sustained focus, and complex behaviors also take a hit. It's not just one thing, it's a whole package deal at the foundation level. These cases force us to see the brain not as a single monolithic processor, but as a layered system, with core consciousness sitting right at the base. Okay, so how do we categorize these disruptions? Let's break down the neurological scenarios where core consciousness takes a nosedive. First, you have cases like akinetic mutism or certain epileptic automatisms. Here, the person might be awake, technically attentive, maybe even perform some basic actions, but they're disconnected. They're like puppets moving through a script without understanding it. The core knowing is gone. Second, there are situations like absence seizures or the persistent vegetative state. In these, wakefulness is still there, eyes open, sleep-wake cycles might even be present as in PVS, but minimal attention and purposeful behavior are shot. The person isn't really engaging with the world in a conscious way. Finally, the most dramatic cases involve coma, deep anesthesia, or fainting. Here, both core consciousness and wakefulness are disrupted. The lights go out entirely. Notice the progression. From intact wakefulness, but lost core consciousness, to partial wakefulness but lost core consciousness, to complete shutdown. Each points to different levels of disruption within the core system. Now let's zoom in on the hardware. Where in the brain do these disruptions typically occur? There's a fascinating, almost eerie consistency. Damage that knocks out core consciousness tends to cluster near the brain's midline. Think about the older, deeper structures, the brainstem, the thalamus, the hypothalamus. They're nestled right along the central canal, the very heart of the CNS. Even at the cortical level, the affected areas are tucked away on the medial surfaces, hidden from view if you're just looking at the outside of the brain. It's like the brain's control room is centrally located. And these aren't newfangled structures. They're ancient, found across many species, and they develop early in life. This suggests that core consciousness isn't some fancy recent evolutionary add-on. It's built upon very old fundamental neural circuits, positioned right in the middle of the action. Alright, let's tackle a popular idea, one I heard echoed constantly during my training: language created consciousness. The logic seemed simple. Humans have language, animals don't, therefore, language equals consciousness. But something always felt off. It sounded too easy, too neat. When I saw animals, I didn't see uncognizant beings. I saw complex creatures with their own worlds. So, let's dissect this. Language, words and sentences, is fundamentally a translation tool. It converts nonverbal images, pictures of things, events, relationships, inferences, into a symbolic code. If language works for everything else by symbolizing something pre-existing, then for self and consciousness, it must be symbolizing a nonverbal self and a nonverbal knowing. The phrase "I know" doesn't conjure up the knowing, it translates an existing nonverbal state. To suggest self and consciousness emerged after language, solely constructed by it, seems highly unlikely. It would be the only case of words appearing without an underlying concept. Language is incredibly powerful, especially for our extended consciousness, but it's likely built upon, not creating, the core. The real proof against language being the source of core consciousness comes from observing patients with severe language disorders, aphasia. Look at them closely. Despite being unable to form coherent sentences or understand spoken words, their thought process remained fundamentally intact. More importantly, their consciousness, their sense of situation, feels just like ours. They can signal understanding, laugh at a joke, cry at sadness, express intentions, even if it's through a raised eyebrow or a carefully chosen gesture. Their emotions are rich, varied, and clearly tied to what's happening around them. Take global aphasia, the most severe form. These individuals understand nothing, can't produce speech beyond maybe a few sounds, can't read, can't repeat. Yet communicate with them patiently, using their limited vocabulary of signs and expressions, and you'll never doubt their humanity, their consciousness. They are thinking, feeling, aware beings, just unable to translate those inner states into standard language. Language is clearly a major contributor to our sophisticated extended consciousness, but it's nowhere to be found as the engine driving core consciousness. Now let's play devil's advocate. A skeptic might argue, okay, maybe in global aphasia, some tiny remnant of language areas in the prefrontal cortex or occipital lobe is still active, enough to generate consciousness. Fair point. How do we counter this? We look at the extreme case, radical left hemispherectomy. This involved surgically removing the entire left hemisphere, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, surrounding cortex, white matter, the works. Result? Catastrophic language loss, the absolute worst kind of global aphasia. But here's the kicker. Consciousness remained. Consider patient Earl, studied by Geschwind. His language was reduced to a few expletives, used with perfect intention. He wasn't just a reflex machine. He attempted responses, used gestures, showed frustration, had finely tuned emotional reactions appropriate to the moment. He was clearly conscious, aware, and engaged, even though the vast majority of his language centers were gone. This strongly suggests that whatever generates core consciousness isn't housed in those specific language regions, nor is it dependent on the full machinery of language processing. So if language isn't creating core consciousness, what is its glory? Its true power lies elsewhere. Language is an incredible tool for precision, allowing us to translate thoughts into exact words and vice versa. It's efficient for organizing knowledge under neat labels, and it lets us discuss abstract ideas in imaginary worlds with ease. All these feats have fueled our incredible intellectual growth and shaped our sophisticated extended consciousness. But none of this linguistic wizardry has anything to do with generating the raw sense of self or the fundamental feeling of knowing. Think about my grandmother who had aphasia. Her language was limited, but her mind wasn't. Looking at a photo of Nancy Reagan, she couldn't name her, but she looked at me and said, "If you had that much money, I'd be like that either." That's consciousness. She understood the implications, the social commentary, the personal reflection, all layered meanings, even if her verbal output was minimal. Her language couldn't keep up with the richness of her thought process, but the core self was undeniably there. Let's move on to another common assumption, memory. Does consciousness depend on having a vast library of past experiences? Again, the evidence points elsewhere. Core consciousness doesn't need extensive autobiographical memory. Patients with profound amnesia, like David, whom we'll meet shortly, show this beautifully. They lack the ability to recall specific past events or learn new facts, yet their core sense of self and awareness remains. What core consciousness actually requires is surprisingly minimal, just a very brief window of short-term memory. Think fractions of a second. You don't need decades of personal history to have the feeling of now, to recognize yourself in the present moment. However, for extended consciousness, that is, for complex thought, planning, social understanding, working memory, holding information temporarily, becomes crucial. But the spark of core consciousness itself seems remarkably independent of long-term memory stores. To illustrate this point about memory and consciousness, let's introduce David. Studying him has been a privilege for over 20 years. He holds the record for perhaps the most profound amnesia ever documented. His condition stems from a severe herpes encephalitis that ravaged his temporal lobes, including the hippocampus, the seat of memory formation. The result is staggering. He suffers from anterograde amnesia, meaning he cannot form new memories. Introduce yourself. Leave the room for 30 seconds. Come back and he'll remember you perfectly. Leave for 3 minutes and he has no idea who you are, defaulting to calling you Cousin George Mackenzie. Even more striking is his retrograde amnesia. He cannot recall most specific details from his past. He knows what a city is, but not the name of the city he lives in. He knows his wife's name, but not what she looks like or sounds like. He can't recognize photos of himself or his family. Yet, ask him about basic concepts, categories, or procedural skills like playing checkers, and he performs admirably. He knows how to win, even if he can't explain the rules or recall ever playing before. His internal clock works, he sleeps normally, including REM sleep. It's a mind operating in a world of generics, stripped of specifics. So given David's profound memory loss, the burning question is he conscious? Does he have a sense of self? Let's apply our core consciousness checklist. First, wakefulness. Yes, he's awake, alert, sleeps normally. Second, attention. Yes, he attends to stimuli, focuses, sustains attention when engaged, like playing checkers. Third, emotion. Absolutely. Background feelings flow, and he experiences primary and secondary emotions vividly. Winning at checkers brings genuine delight. His voice changes with anticipation. Fourth, purposeful behavior. Yes, he acts goal-directed, seeks out chairs, food, entertainment, maintains purposeful activity for hours if engaged. Compare this to someone in akinetic mutism, who might be awake but lacks sustained attention and overall purpose. David clearly passes the test. He is conscious, he is aware. He is not a zombie. While his mind operates differently, lacking specific autobiographical content, the fundamental sense of self and awareness is undeniably present. What does David's mind actually feel like from the inside? It's not empty, but it's different. He definitely has a stream of consciousness, a continuous flow of images from various senses, coordinated and changing over time, much like the literary soliloquies of Shakespeare or Joyce. The difference lies in the content. His images are filled with the general, the conceptual. He knows what a car is, but not the specific car he owned. He sees a picture of his son and describes a young man with a nice smile, but has no idea it's his own child. He can't access specific memories of past events or plan for the future, because those require accessing unique specific information. His mind is like ours, but it runs on a diet of generics. This lack of specificity severely impacts his extended consciousness, particularly social cognition. Understanding complex social dynamics requires drawing on a rich tapestry of specific past interactions and contexts, which David simply doesn't have access to. He observes social norms politely, but the deeper understanding of social collectives eludes him. David's case teaches us two critical lessons. First, and perhaps most importantly, factual knowledge at a unique, specific level is not required for core consciousness. You don't need your life story to be aware of yourself in the present moment. Second, core consciousness does not rely on the massive, complex machinery of the temporal lobes, including the hippocampus and amygdala, which are heavily implicated in memory and emotion. This strongly implies that the neural substrate for core consciousness must be more fundamental, perhaps located in those central, ancient structures we discussed earlier, structures that are less vulnerable to the kind of widespread damage seen in David's case. It's a foundational system, distinct from the higher-order processing centers. Let's quickly recap the key takeaways from these explorations. First, consciousness isn't a single block of ice, it's more like a layered cake. We can reasonably distinguish between a foundational core consciousness and a more complex extended consciousness built upon it. Second, core consciousness is remarkably separable from other vital functions. Being awake or paying attention doesn't guarantee consciousness. Holding information in working memory isn't necessary for the core sense of knowing. Extensive memory recall isn't required either. Language doesn't create it. And even severe impairments in reasoning or planning don't necessarily erase the core sense of self. Third, there's a strong link between emotion and core consciousness. They often rise and fall together, suggesting shared neural underpinnings. These distinctions are crucial for mapping the landscape of the mind. Another crucial insight is the central nature of core consciousness. When it's disturbed, the impact is widespread. It affects all domains of mental activity and all sensory modalities simultaneously. Think about coma or akinetic mutism. The impairment is total, leaving no little island of preserved consciousness. It's a central resource. Contrast this with conditions affecting only one sense, like visual agnosia, where someone can't recognize faces but retains normal core consciousness for the visual stimulus itself and for other senses. They know they don't know the face. Their core consciousness is intact. This highlights that consciousness isn't just a local phenomenon in one sensory channel. It's a global central state that serves the entire organism. Trying to understand consciousness purely by studying vision, for example, misses this fundamental centrality. Now, just because core consciousness is separable doesn't mean it floats free, unconnected. On the contrary, it profoundly influences everything else. It's like the conductor of the orchestra. Core consciousness focuses and enhances attention and working memory. It helps solidify memories. It's absolutely essential for normal language function. And it significantly broadens the scope of intelligent manipulation, enabling effective planning, problem solving, and creativity. Think about it. You need to be aware, to have that core sense of self and knowing, to truly engage with a problem, to feel motivated to solve it, and to appreciate the solution. As the author aptly puts it, we still need digestion to enjoy Bach. Basic processes enable higher appreciation. Core consciousness is the fundamental substrate upon which all these sophisticated mental activities are built and enhanced. So, what exactly is this core consciousness? The author proposes it's an inner sense rooted in images. These aren't just passive pictures, they carry a powerful nonverbal message about the relationship between the organism and the object being perceived or thought about. Crucially, this sense includes an implicit understanding that there's an individual subject involved, a transient entity to which the knowledge belongs. It's the feeling that these images are formed in my perspective, that these thoughts are mine, and that I can act on them. It also involves the enhancement of the object itself, making it salient within this relationship. This view resonates with historical thinkers like William James, who spoke of consciousness as an inner sense, though it's less mainstream today. It captures that immediate intuitive sense of selfhood in the act of knowing. William James identified several fundamental properties of consciousness, and they fit neatly here. Core consciousness is selective, it focuses on certain things. It's continuous, flowing over time. It's always about objects other than itself, it's about the world. And it's personal, it carries a distinct me quality. Importantly, this applies to both the basic core and the more elaborate extended consciousness. How does this core sense arise? It seems to happen in a pulsar-like fashion, a sudden discovery for each piece of information we become conscious of. You confront an object, your brain processes it, and bam! Instantly, you discover that the resulting image is formed in your perspective, belongs to you, and you can act on it. There's no conscious inference process leading to this, it just happens. The mechanism behind this discovery is hidden, operating behind the scenes. Here's a fascinating twist. While the discovery of consciousness feels instantaneous, the underlying process takes time. From the perspective of neurons firing in milliseconds, the events of consciousness unfolding in our minds, tens, hundreds, even thousands of milliseconds, take an eternity. We are, in a sense, hopelessly late for our own consciousness. Benjamin Libet's famous experiments on readiness potential suggested this delay, perhaps around 500 milliseconds between the initial neural trigger and our conscious awareness. It's humbling to realize we exist mentally somewhere between the incredibly fast world of cellular activity and the vast timescale of evolution, and we can't properly grasp either. But because we're all equally late, nobody notices the gap. The feeling of immediacy is an illusion of our own mental timing. This brings us to the subtle presence of the core self. Core consciousness isn't just about external objects. It inherently includes the very thought of you, the feeling of you as the individual knower. However, this sense of self is often remarkably subtle. It doesn't shout for attention. It operates quietly in the background. Why? Because our attentional resources are finite. When we're intensely focused on reading, listening, or solving a problem, we're not typically paying attention to the fact that we are reading, listening, or solving the problem. Consider the author's example, juggling coffee, a book, and picking up pens on the stairs, all smoothly, automatically. Only by pausing and reflecting did he notice the intricate mental plan guiding those actions. The core self is always there, providing the sense of ownership and agency, but it's often discrete, saving valuable processing power unless we specifically choose to reflect on it. Not at all. While you can consciously try to minimize or maximize the elaborate autobiographical self, you cannot make the core sense of self vanish entirely. It's always there, and its importance cannot be overstated. Removing core consciousness, except in sleep or anesthesia, is a clear sign of neurological disease. Partial removal creates states that are immediately recognizable as abnormal to others, even if the affected person doesn't perceive anything wrong, because if you don't know, you don't know, you don't know. The most dangerous scenario is losing the sense of knowing and self while remaining awake. This puts the organism at grave risk, capable of acting without understanding the consequences. It's like thoughts are generated, but there's no owner to claim them, no self to navigate the implications. A substantial core self is always present, and that's a good thing. So, wrapping up this section, we see that core consciousness is the bedrock. It's the fundamental unvarnished sense of our individual organism in the act of knowing. It's the pulse that underlies all the sophisticated performances of extended consciousness. Attention, memory, language, intelligence, they all operate more effectively because of this core foundation. And critically, even when the higher functions falter, as we saw in David's case, this core sense of self and knowing often remains, shining a light into the darkness. It's the essential, irreducible element of our mental life,